It's often said that the worst secrets are revealed sooner or later. But what if that secret is hidden right in your own home? And even more terrifying, if you've spent your whole life protecting it? That's exactly what Jake Reiner, son of Hollywood legend Rob Reiner, is bravely revealing, with genuine emotion and without hesitation. His story will not only tug at your heartstrings, but also send shivers down your spine. If you're interested in these shocking secrets, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications now so you don't miss any updates. Jake's statement was simple. He knew. My father knew Nick was dangerous, but he ignored it time and time again. Think about that. Rob Reiner, the man behind classics like A Few Good Men, Stand By Me, and The Princess Bride, a cinematic icon associated with morality, justice, and the courage to stand up for the truth, is accused of remaining silent about a danger within his own family. A ticking time bomb. And now, tragedy has struck. His wife was murdered at their $13.5 million Brentwood mansion on a quiet Sunday afternoon, and their son, Nick Reiner, 32, living in the guest house, is now facing double murder charges. But the most shocking part is yet to come. According to those close to him and Jake himself, this wasn't a sudden mental breakdown, nor was it an unforeseen tragedy. The warning signs were there. They were there to address, but they were covered up. For what reason? To protect his legacy, his reputation, or something darker? This is what we're about to discover. When you see the whole picture, when you hear the things people were too afraid to say when Rob was alive, you may no longer see this beloved Hollywood father as you once did. The story isn't over yet, and what's about to happen will take your breath away. On December 14th, news began to leak. A double murder in Brentwood. Initially vague, then explosive. Police raided the compound. Rumors of multiple victims spread. At first, no one revealed names. Then names emerged: Rob Reiner, Michelle Singer Reiner, and Hollywood seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just another celebrity gossip. This is a family. A man who shaped the voice of American cinema was murdered alongside his wife of over 3 decades. The real shock came hours after the suspect was identified, their son, Nick. But Nick Reiner was no stranger to the public. He had tried his hand at screenwriting, co-writing Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical film about addiction, ironically directed by his father. The film was authentic, deeply personal, and many viewed it as a silent cry for help. But behind closed doors, Nick's behavior became increasingly erratic, unpredictable, and at times terrifying. The signs were there, but were they ignored or buried? A 911 call from their daughter, Romy, 27, made things even more heartbreaking. Because the bodies weren't immediately found by police, nor were any neighbors aware, Romy was the one who discovered both her parents dead, brutally murdered. The first words that escaped her lips, according to the leaked police recording, were, "It's Nick. He lives here. We need to check on Nick." Pause for a moment to savor this moment. She stepped onto her family's property, discovered the tragedy, and realized the perpetrator was none other than her own brother. How long had she known this, seen this, and feared this? Romy wasn't the only one expressing concern. Jake Reiner, the quiet son, a former calm, thoughtful broadcaster who always kept his distance from Hollywood, choosing journalism over film, also felt the burden of family fame as a pressure rather than pride. When the news broke, he remained silent for 3 days before exploding. In an exclusive interview, his voice trembling, his eyes red, Jake did something no one in Hollywood had ever done before. He exposed the truth about his own father. And what he said was truly brutal and cruel. These allegations come from a son who knows his family well. Jake alleges that, for years, Nick's mental health problems were not only noticeable, but also unavoidable. He recounts recurring acts of violence, not just once or twice, but multiple bouts of screaming, fighting, shattered windows, and always the same pattern, the pattern of silence, of cover-ups. Jake claims the family hired private doctors instead of reporting the incidents, that therapists were fired for daring to warn, and that Michelle recorded her fears in a diary, now in police possession. But most reprehensible, according to Jake, is that Rob knew it all. He told me in 2022, Jake alleges. Jake says, "I'm afraid of what Nick might do, but I don't want him to be put into a mental institution. Not again. Not again." This statement is particularly important because it shows this isn't the first time Nick has been down, not the first time he's been violent. Yet he's still living alone in the guest house, unsupervised. Why? That's the question Jake wants answered. And it's a question we should ask ourselves too. If Rob Reiner, the director of films about law, justice, and truth, leaves his wife alone with someone he knows is dangerous, what does that say? Is it cowardice? Is it love? Is it denial? Or something far worse? The Hollywood drama has ended. This isn't just a tragedy, it's a collapse. A broken family, a fractured legacy, and the world is watching. For decades, Rob Reiner was more than just a director. He was America's father, a voice of reason, a stand-up against Trump, an icon of progressive ideals. But now, he himself is accused by his son of harboring a danger in the house, choosing silence over safety, protecting the family's reputation over his wife's. And even though Rob no longer has the defense, the evidence is piling up. Witnesses, documents, private recordings, diaries, and Jake. Jake insists he's only just begun. 3 days after the murder, alone at home, looking through family photos from decades past, his phone rings. Some numbers blocked, a message of just 5 words. "We were all warned." That moment changes everything for Jake, because he understands he's not alone, that someone else knows. But who? What did Rob Reiner overlook? As he begins his investigation, Jake discovers his mother Michelle's diary, a hidden notebook, handwritten, untouched. What it contains is where the story truly begins. What would you do if your mother wrote a farewell that no one noticed? That's exactly what Jake believes happened. And it all points to one thing: Michelle's diary. It wasn't just rambling thoughts or a to-do list. It was a silent cry, a cry that went unanswered. After the tragedy, it might be the most haunting evidence left behind. The diary entry devastated Jake. It was bound in leather, frayed at the edges, hidden behind a rarely used bookshelf. According to investigators, Jake said he found it after the funeral, while helping Romy collect personal belongings from the estate. At first, Jake felt the diary was too private to touch, too sacred to open. But something compelled him to open it. And what he read left him speechless. "I'm afraid of my own son." Those were the first words he saw, written in Michelle's neat, flowing cursive handwriting, dated just 1 month before her death. Page after page, entry after entry, Michelle recorded moments no mother should ever write about. Threats, outbursts, times she had to lock the door while Nick paced back and forth outside. She even recorded Rob's reaction. "Nick is getting worse and worse," he said. "We've been through worse things, but this time feels different. Right now, I think he might hurt someone." Think about it. A mother anticipating her own death, begging her husband to see the fear she was experiencing, and a father who supposedly chose to remain silent. Jake recounted that after reading it, he closed the diary, went into the kitchen, and vomited. He told us that this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a slow-moving train accident, and his father was standing on the tracks, smiling. Why didn't Rob act? This is the question echoing in every newspaper headline, in every courtroom, every family living room. What could Rob Reiner, director, political activist, family man, have done? Let's analyze the possibilities. First, denial. Perhaps Rob genuinely couldn't believe his son was dangerous, perhaps thinking that love and patience were enough. But if Michelle's diary was credible, he already knew. He just didn't want to face it. Second, reputation. Rob Reiner wasn't just a man, he was a brand. The thought of his son's downfall could threaten everything: awards, public respect, the legacy he had painstakingly built. Did he really risk everything for the truth? Third, love. An unsettling twist. If Rob's silence was love, a distorted, desperate love for his wayward son, and he couldn't let go. Perhaps he thought he was protecting Nick, but in his attempt to save his son, he lost everything else. What do you think? Cowardice, pride, love, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts. The family had stopped talking, but let's rewind. Jake says the cracks began long before the murder. He hadn't spoken to Nick for almost 6 months because of a voicemail. Jake called his father, but the call went to voicemail. Hours later, he received a text from Rob, "Don't anger your brother. Let me handle it." Jake doesn't specify how he responded, but it's clear he was pleading with his father to act, and instead of siding with his eldest son, Rob protected his youngest. A typical act of a tolerant or panicked father. According to Jake, that was the day he gave up all effort. There's also a voice never heard publicly in this story. Romy, Reiner's youngest daughter, the one who discovered the bodies. She's been silent since the arrest. No press conferences, no statements. But Jake says she confided in him once, a single sentence that still sends shivers down his spine today. "I told you, Dad, that I didn't feel safe." Romy had expressed her concerns many times. She didn't want to be home alone with Nick, had heard him talking to himself, pacing back and forth at 3 a.m. When she told Rob, he told her to go stay with friends, not to confront him, not to call a doctor, just to leave. Jake says this wasn't an isolated mistake, but a habit of ignoring, overlooking, doing nothing until it's too late. The silence of Hollywood is now revealed. This is something you've never heard on TMZ. Jake said that at least 2 of Rob's friends, powerful figures in Hollywood, had approached him over the years with concerns. But those warnings were ignored, and the result is the tragedy we are witnessing today. One person reportedly said, "Rob, you need to help Nick. He's not okay." Another warned, "If this gets into the tabloids, they'll devour you. Take action." But nothing happened. No press release, no intervention, no public acknowledgement of Nick's distress. Instead, the family's public relations machine stepped in. Jake alleges that PR professionals were instructed to avoid any questions about Nick's behavior. Events were staged to project an image of a united family. And when Jake stopped appearing at some premieres, the reason given was a scheduling conflicts. But behind the smiles on the red carpet was a burning house, and no one was quick to grab the fire hose. In our final conversation, we asked Jake what the last thing he said to his father was. He didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the floor, rubbed his hands, swallowed, and said, "I told him that if anything happened, it would be Dad's fault." He wasn't referring to death, not to blood, but now, with both his parents gone, with his brother in prison, those words still echoed. Jake said that those words haunted him, heard even in his sleep. Every night, they blamed him. This story isn't just a Hollywood tragedy. It's a warning about denial, about complicity, about the consequences of blind love. Rob Reiner made films about truth, about people standing up in courtrooms, shouting, "You can't stand the truth." But when the truth knocked on his door, he supposedly turned his back. Now, Jake, broken, heartbroken, and angry, sets himself the task of ensuring the world faces the truth. Because silence is no longer an option. What happens next? Jake isn't stopping there. He's working with investigators, meeting with lawyers, and, according to sources, considering legal action regarding assets and a potentially concealed mental health history. But he's not just focused on legal battles. Jake wants change. He's pushing for new guidelines on mental health support for adult children in Hollywood families, on transparency and accountability. And he's sending a clear message to all of US. Don't wait. If you see something, say it. If you know something, act. Even if it's a relative, especially if it's a relative. Because if someone had acted sooner, Rob and Michelle Reiner might still be alive. But what about Nick? This is the final turning point. Nick's legal team now claims he has no memory of the attack, preparing a defense based on amnesia, arguing that Nick was not in control of himself and needs treatment rather than punishment. But Jake doesn't believe that. In Chapter 1, we'll explore this in detail. We'll be tracing the details of the final 24 hours before the tragedy, because there are people who know the truth, and what they did was captured on surveillance cameras. This is a timeline that not only records the events, but also reveals the haunting decisions, actions, and omissions of the family members. What if the last time you tried to speak to your father, he didn't answer? And what if, a few hours later, he was gone? For Jake Reiner, it wasn't a hypothesis. That final moment of silence has haunted him ever since, etched into his mind as an unshakable warning. On Sunday morning, December 14th, Jake made one last attempt to intervene. to contact someone he believed still held hope for the family's future. He called his father. The phone rang incessantly and went straight to voicemail. At that moment, he didn't think too much. Rob not answering the phone on Sunday wasn't unusual. He could be writing, entertaining clients, or quietly managing Nick without anyone knowing the simmering crisis behind the Brentwood gates. But Jake left a message, and it wasn't an ordinary message, but a silent plea for help, heavy with anxiety and fear. According to sources close to him, and later partially confirmed by leaked recordings, Jake's voice trembled with urgency. "Dad, please call me. Something's wrong. Last night I dreamt of Mom, of Nick. I know it sounds strange, but I need to talk to you today. Please." It was 10:07 a.m. By 5:42 p.m., both Rob and Michelle Reiner were dead. A premonition Jake couldn't shake. In an exclusive statement, he called it a premonition. He woke up feeling restless and agitated. He dreamt of his mother screaming, of Nick holding something, and of blood. Initially, he dismissed it, thinking it was just stress, trauma, or months of anxiety about a situation spiraling out of control. But something inside wouldn't let go. The agonizing contradiction was that Jake didn't expect an answer because by then, his father had begun ignoring his warnings. 3 weeks earlier, Jake had driven from Santa Barbara to the mansion for a family dinner. A tense atmosphere hung in the air. Nick was absent. Michelle looked tired, dark circles visible under her eyes, her smile barely reaching her eyes. Rob constantly checked his phone, barely looking at Jake, giving vague answers when asked directly. When Jake asked, "Is Nick still in therapy?" Rob replied, "He's managing. You know." Jake pressed on, drawing on information from a counselor who had treated Nick for addiction, who had warned, "Dad, you can't let this continue. You can't pretend it's not dangerous." Rob was silent for a moment, then said, "I don't understand. I've never understood him." That was their last meaningful conversation. Jake left early, without a hug, and for 3 weeks they had no contact until the day of the crime. The 10:07 a.m. call went unanswered. Brentwood security cameras recorded the house being quiet from 9 a.m. to 11:45 a.m. The last activity recorded was Michelle receiving groceries at 9:38 a.m. After that, silence. No one left, no one came in. At 12:03 p.m., the camera captures Nick walking from the guest house to the main house, carrying what appears to be a folded hoodie, a normal, unannounced action. But at 12:37 p.m., the main house's alarm system is manually deactivated from the inside. This is when the chill begins to spread. Every movement, every detail captured, will be analyzed to unveil the secrets of these 24 haunting hours, where silence, wrong choices, and indifference created an inevitable tragedy. These are moments Jake Reiner will never forget, and the world is about to witness. According to the digital records, Rob's phone played a haunting role in that final timeline. Jake received a voicemail at 10:08 a.m., but it was never played. The question of what if haunted him. Jake's voice choked as he recounted this. The thought that his father's phone, just inches away, vibrating with a message, might have made him stop, lock the door, or call for help, but it didn't. What if he had answered? Jake wondered, would they still be alive? It was the kind of question with no answer, yet it haunted his mind, etching guilt into his very bones. But Jake wasn't just asking for sympathy. He was trying to illustrate something even darker, that even in the final hours when the house still stood, when everyone was still breathing, there were warnings, there were signals, and they were ignored. A portion of a voicemail recording was obtained from sources close to the investigation. In it, Jake's voice trembled with urgency. "Dad, I need to talk to you. I have a feeling about today, about Nick. I know I'm overreacting, but I don't care anymore. I'm not okay with anything in this. Please call me as soon as possible." He just wanted to call back, even if it was just so his father could tell him he was overthinking things. But Rob didn't answer. Just 40 minutes after that message, things took a horrifying turn. Romy called 911. There was blood. "My parents. I think they're dead." This was the name Jake had feared. The same man Michelle had written about in her diary. The same man later found with scratches on his arms and blood under his fingernails. All the clues pointed in one direction, but no one intervened in time. What was even more frightening was that Nick didn't run when the police arrived at the Brentwood estate. He didn't barricade himself, didn't hide the knife, didn't try to escape. He just sat in the guest house, shirtless, calm. Some reports said he looked dazed, others said he smiled. Jake wasn't surprised. He knew Nick's mind didn't function like a normal person's. He lived in a reality of his own making, where there were no consequences, because it was the reality his father had protected. But if Nick remained calm, what led to the crime? Why that day? Why that time? Jake said he might know, because the night before, Nick had also left him a voicemail. An cryptic, stuttering message. At 11:22 p.m. Nick mumbled, but beneath the surface lay a chilling coldness. "You think you're better than me. You always thought so. But she lied to me." And he let her. They all let her. Jake didn't hear the recording until after the murder. It sat in his voicemail for nearly 36 hours, buried under missed calls, condolence messages from friends, and a barrage of press inquiries. When he pressed play, the room fell silent. He recounted it to the investigators, then to Romy, and finally to the press. When the full recording was released at bail hearing, everyone was stunned. Nick wasn't just angry. He was threatening, naming those involved, revealing a long-hidden rift in the family that had been largely unknown. To be honest, every family has its tensions, but the Reiner family is unlike any other. They are seen as Hollywood's royalty, cultivating a perfect image, tolerant, loving, morally upright, always radiant in front of the cameras, always giving the impression of peace and harmony. But behind the smiles on Instagram, the poses on the red carpet, lies a crack that few notice. And it was Nick's voicemail that brought that crack to light. In the message, he vented his anger about betrayal, favoritism, and feeling manipulated. He called Romy Dad's little puppet, accused Michelle of choosing the wrong side, and his harshest criticism was directed at Jake. "You pretend to be innocent, but you're just the family spokesperson. You don't know what she did. You don't know what they promised me. What does that mean? What promise? What betrayal?" Jake insisted he knew nothing, but Romy could. When he played her the text messages, she broke down in tears, and then revealed something that shed light on the whole case: a deal with the shadows. Romy said that earlier that year, when Nick was angry, Michelle had secretly offered him a reward to return to the Arizona therapy program, $200,000. In reality, Michelle had overheard Nick on a whispered phone call in the hallway, saw him miss 2 therapy sessions, complain about being followed, and even go days without showering. Nick took the money, but didn't go to Arizona. Instead, he disappeared for 3 days, no contact, no GPS, no notification to anyone. When he returned, Michelle didn't say anything to anyone, Jake, Romy, or Rob. If this theory is correct, she simply ignored it, as if ignoring it would make everything all right. Jake believed that this very lie was what Nick was referring to in the text message, and the feeling of being deceived, manipulated, and bought had haunted him for months. When the voices in Nick's head surfaced, they were directed at the people he blamed, his own family. And it was this feeling of betrayal that had built up into a simmering rage, ready to explode. But why didn't Jake intervene sooner? Why didn't he confront his brother directly, call the police, or inform the media? Jake said he tried, but Rob's resistance was suffocating. "You're going to ruin your brother's life. You're going to destroy this family," Rob warned after an argument. Those words still echoed in Jake's head, as if concealing the truth was what made the family whole. He began to distance himself, but still watched, waiting for someone to act before it was too late. Now, he blamed himself for not pushing harder. He feared losing his father, and now he had. The case became even darker because the voicemail Nick left on Saturday night wasn't the only one. Jake provided law enforcement with 2 other messages from Nick, one from October and one from late November. In both, Nick's voice was out of control, mentioning the idea of purification, starting over, and referring to inheritance, as if it were a pre-planned scenario. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was calculated, a sign of someone emotionally broken, believing they were wrongly accused and waiting for their chance for revenge. Worst of all, no one stopped him. Rob Reiner, famous for films that emphasize justice, morality, and accountability, failed to apply those standards to his own family. While the Reiner family appeared perfect on the outside, inside were smoldering, unresolved shadows waiting to explode. Imagine the room in the guest house. It was spotless, almost too perfect. The police remarked that it looked unusual for a place where people lived daily. No dirty dishes, no soiled clothes, just a small stack of diaries in a drawer, prescription bottles, some still in use, some expired. Everything was meticulously arranged, sterile, to the point of perfection. But that very perfection concealed an impending explosion of darkness, like a veil obscuring any warning signs that could have saved everything. The quiet, orderly, almost silent atmosphere made anyone who entered feel unsuspecting. But in reality, every detail told a story of tension, anger, and secrets that had been silently accumulating for months. On his desk sat a childhood photo of Nick, Rob, and Michelle taken on a beach in Maui. Jake said that every time he saw the photo, he shuddered. Not just because of the happy family image it portrayed, but also because of how Nick had handled it. He had folded the photo in half, and the part with Michelle in it had been torn out. It was a mental shock, a clear sign of the accumulated anger and hurt that no one in the family wanted to acknowledge. We asked Jake one last question before ending the interview. If he could talk to Nick, what would he say? He paused, looked out the window, and then said, "You had chances. So many chances. We loved you. We all tried. But you didn't just kill our parents. You killed every memory of them that I still have. I don't know if I could ever forgive that." His voice wasn't loud, but it trembled. And it was that tremor, more than any voicemail, any headline, or any court document, that made the story so heartbreaking. It wasn't just the loss of 2 lives. The pain tormented those left behind. But the next day, another shock came. Jake thought the worst was over, that the pain was finally over, until he received an envelope slipped under his apartment door. No name, no sender's address, just a line of black ink. "Check your mother's safe." Inside were 2 keys and a map of the Brentwood estate. As Jake followed the map, what he discovered under the floorboards, under Michelle's closet, recounted everything he knew about the murder. Who was Nick Reiner? Not just a name, but the real person, the mystery, the warning signs everyone noticed but no one wanted to acknowledge. Previously, he was seen as the darling, the royal heir to Hollywood, the son of the legendary Rob Reiner, the grandson of Carl Reiner, the comedic genius and pioneer of the film industry. A boy who grew up surrounded by film sets and red carpets, photographed, positioned as the next creative genius in the Reiner dynasty. But hidden behind the glamour and promise, Nick lived cautiously, in the shadows, with everyone around him pretending that there was no risk of collapse. From birth, Nick faced immense pressure, wealth, fame, expectations. But this is the part few people knew until now. Nick wasn't just a rebellious teenager. He was battling something deeper, darker. According to babysitters, former tutors, and close family friends, Nick showed signs of mental health instability from his teenage years. Mood swings, violent outbursts, compulsive lying, obsessive behaviors interspersed with weeks of deep depression. Jake later described their childhood as like walking through a minefield you don't know exists until you step on one. Every sign, every warning was ignored, leaving a tragic consequence that no one in the family could have foreseen. But no one talked about it. In the Reiner family, image was everything, and Nick was untouchable. The first clues, the 911 calls, were forgotten. A former employee of the mansion, referred to only as Anna to protect her identity, told authorities she witnessed Nick's first outburst of violence when he was just 14. Nick had argued with his mother about curfew. Minutes later, screaming and crashing could be heard. When Anna arrived at the living room, Nick had smashed a vase, punched through the wall, and yelled, "Mom, you can't control me. Rob isn't home." Michelle told Anna to go back upstairs, saying Nick just needed some space. When Anna asked if they should call 911, Michelle shook her head. "We don't let outsiders interfere in our family matters." It wasn't the last time Nick had a fit of rage, but it was the first time the rage had been suppressed. The problems were then covered up, moving from one private school to another. Nick attended at least 4 private schools in Los Angeles before turning 18. Records documented numerous behavioral problems, code-breaking violations, and unauthorized absences. What remained undisclosed was a teacher's description of his emotional instability, almost antisocial tendencies. Reports indicated Nick had threatened classmates with violence, been caught drawing violent pictures in his notebook, stolen medication from another student's bag, and yelled at a teacher in a crowded hallway. "I'll kill you if you fail me." There were no formal charges, no police intervention, just another quiet school transfer, a donation, another incident covered up. The Reiner family had money, influence, and Nick had an invisible shield protecting him. At age 19, Nick was hospitalized after a minor health issue. But according to Jake, that's when everything started to fall apart. Nick was found unconscious in a friend's apartment in Laurel Canyon. A toxicology report, later sealed, identified a mixture of opioids, alcohol, and unidentified stimulants. His family panicked, chartering a private plane to take him to a high-end rehabilitation facility in Arizona. The media called it a wellness resort, but in reality, it was a wall of pressure, expectations, and strict surveillance. A former patient, who wished to remain anonymous, remembers Nick vividly, describing him as evasive, quick-tempered, and constantly pressured to appear healed in front of his family. "My father would never let me fail. He needed me to look perfect," the patient said. This is when the cracks, long hidden, began to surface. In 2016, Nick co-wrote the semi-autobiographical film Being Charlie, about a young man struggling with addiction and family pressure. A stark reminder that the stories within the Reiner family, while beautiful on the surface, always contain deep cracks beneath. The film, directed by Rob, was promoted as a deeply personal collaboration between father and son. But according to Jake, behind the scenes, it was more of a performance than salvation. The film didn't heal. It masked. It allowed the father to continue pretending that Nick was okay. It gave the family something to show off, to point to and say, "See, he's okay." But Nick wasn't okay. He was far from stable. The closed doors concealed an ever-growing darkness. In an interview, Jake revealed that between 2018 and 2021, Nick was twice placed in involuntary psychiatric detention under California's Section 5150, a measure only applied when a person is considered a risk to themselves or others. The public was unaware. Records were sealed. Visits were not recorded. Why? According to Jake, it was Rob's influence. Hospital staff recounted the calls and pleas. The legal team scrutinized every page. Nick's last name became a silent shield. But the pieces kept appearing. A neighbor complained of shouting at 2 a.m. coming from the backyard. An ex-girlfriend confided in friends that she feared for her safety, but didn't dare sue. A gardener reportedly quit after Nick evicted her from the property for alleged spying. And each time, there were no consequences. The machine called Reiner not only created films, it also wiped out trouble, until it couldn't anymore. Last year, things started to spiral downwards. By 2023, Nick was back in Brentwood, living in a guest house, isolated, depressed, emaciated, and ill. Jake barely spoke to him anymore. Romy completely avoided him. According to diaries and witness accounts, Michelle lived in fear. Rob remained silent. Jake said that was the most heartbreaking thing. He wasn't blind. He just refused to face the truth. And that refusal took everything away. Family and friends noticed Nick was no longer at gatherings. He deleted his social media accounts. He didn't reply to messages. Then whispers began to spread. Nick said he heard voices, that he believed he was being watched, that he had told a neighbor the government had implanted something in his head. But still, no one intervened. No one stepped forward to help. Because what do you do when the person who frightens you is your own family? So who was Nick Reiner? A child raised amidst love and pressure. A teenager who needed help, but was trapped by the need to maintain his image. A man slowly fading into obscurity, while the world continues to celebrate his surname. Jake says Nick wasn't born a monster, but he became one, and everyone turned their backs on him. What happens when a family protects its reputation more than any human being? What happens when silence becomes a strategy? What happens when no one speaks up until it's too late? Because Nick Reiner may be imprisoned, but the true story is only just beginning to unfold. And if Jake's hypothesis is correct, If the Reiner family's silence wasn't just shame, but a tacit agreement, a betrayal, and a cover-up, then what's buried in Brentwood could be darker than anyone imagines. Because next, the safe door will be opened. And what Jake finds inside isn't money, isn't weapons, but evidence. And then the question echoed in every living room, from Hollywood to Hoboken. After all the breakdowns, the erratic behavior, the hospitalizations, why did Rob and Michelle Reiner still allow their troubled son to return to live on the same property, not just nearby, but in the guest house, just steps from their bedroom? Was it pity, control, or something far more complex? Jake now calls it a deal with the devil, because when Nick returns home in early 2024, he won't be alone. He'll bring the devils with him. In January 2024, Nick returned. Neighbors vividly remember him driving a black SUV, ridden by a security guard from the film studio, onto the grounds. He carried a duffel bag, a backpack, and his icy stare sent shivers down anyone's spine. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked past the mailboxes, across the cobblestone street, and disappeared into the guest house. From that moment, everything changed. Jake said it wasn't a family reunion, but a risky move. Nick had just left a failed rehabilitation center in Montana, discharged after an argument with another patient. The center's staff even called Michelle, warning her not to take him in. Jake begged her to reconsider, but Rob made the decision. He told Jake it was only temporary, that Nick just needed things to go according to plan, that they would be closely monitoring him. But that wasn't the case. The house transformed into a tense stage. The Reiner Brentwood estate, once a symbol of warmth, barbecues, private movie screenings, family spaces filled with laughter, had changed completely since Nick's return. An anonymous former housekeeper said the house felt haunted. Doors were always locked, even during the day. Michelle carried her phone with her at all times, even in the bathroom. Staff numbers were reduced to just 2 part-time cleaners allowed inside. Nick never entered the main house through the front door. He moved around the house via the side, lurking like a ghost, but never truly stepping inside. Jake likened it to seeing a wolf sleeping outside a bedroom window and having to pretend the glass was enough to block it out. Between February and September 2024, at least 6 incidents involving Nick were witnessed by neighbors or staff, but none were formally reported to the police. In February, Nick had a heated argument with Rob on the tennis court, shouting, "You're a liar. You said I'd be part of this family again." In March, furniture on the back porch of the guest house was damaged. Michelle attributed it to the wind. In May, the gardener quit after Nick accused him of placing a microphone in the mulch. In July, when Jake tried to confront him, Nick stared blankly for 30 seconds before muttering, "You shouldn't be here when it's over." In August, Romy locked herself in the bathroom after Nick cornered her in the kitchen. She told Jake he looked like a different person. In September, the main home security alarm was disabled from inside at 3:12 a.m. The footage was deleted and no explanation was given. Each time, Rob avoided the issue. Each time Michelle cried alone. Each time Jake begged them to act. But the fear of the press, of exposure, of losing control of the story led the Reiner family to choose silence, until that silence became dangerous. Conversations Jake could never forget, warnings ignored, and by October 2024, he stopped visiting, calling only every few days, hoping things had changed. But those calls became increasingly somber, heavier, foreshadowing what was to come. One night, Michelle whispered on the phone, and Nick eavesdropped from behind the walls. Jake was certain of it. He suggested she move in with him in Santa Barbara, but Michelle refused. "If I leave, he'll think I've abandoned him," she said. Jake pleaded with his father to act, but Rob replied, "We can't abandon him. That's not what families should do." And this very conflict haunted every subsequent decision. Rob made films about justice, about good men doing the hard work, but in his own home, he chose comfort over confrontation. The therapist tried to intervene, but failed. In November, Michelle quietly hired a private therapist, Dr. Thomas Weller, a calm, reputable psychologist specializing in famous families, to visit Nick at home. He came 3 times. After the 3rd visit, he texted Michelle, "I'm worried." This can't be resolved without a higher level of care. Rob, read this." He never replied. 2 days later, Dr. Weller was fired. There was no formal explanation, only a thank you email from family lawyer Reiner. Jake didn't know about this until weeks later. He called it his last chance, before everything fell apart. The diary entry said it all. On December 1st, 2024, Michelle wrote, "Last night, he stood outside our bedroom. Didn't say a word. Just stared at the door." Rob said, "I was imagining, but I saw the knife in his hand. I knew what I saw." The secret diary that Jake found after her death was recorded at 11:47 p.m., just 2 weeks before the murder. But nothing was done. No police report, no press release, just another layer of silence added to an already crumbling wall. Jake believed it all boiled down to one word: fear. Not fear of Nick, but fear of the consequences. Rob worried that if Nick was sent back to the psychiatric institution, the press would swarm, the script would be withdrawn, investors would be wary, and his reputation was crumbling. So he took a gamble. He believed the guest house was far enough, locked, and regularly checked. But monsters don't need keys, they just need silence. As for the guest house, 1,200 square feet, 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, views of the pool and garden. The security cameras, renovated in 2022 for guests, mysteriously stopped working in December. Rob made a change that Jake found strange. The door was reinforced from the inside. Nick could lock himself away, but no one could get in without a master key. Jake asked Rob, "Why?" He replied, "Everyone needs privacy." Now that statement is like a tombstone. On the night of December 13th, Michelle called Jake in the middle of the night in a panic. She was pacing, writing something, unable to sleep. Jake told her to call security, but Michelle said Rob didn't want to escalate the situation. She forced a smile. Then Rob said something Jake could never forget. "If anything happens, make sure everyone knows I tried." The line was cut. Jake didn't sleep that night, calling Rob the next morning, but no one answered. Everyone knew the ending. But there was one more piece of the puzzle, one the police wouldn't find. A diary, not Michelle's, which Jake would stumble upon when checking the guest house a few days later. Nick's pages were tattered, the ink smudged, but one line etched itself into Jake's mind. "I wasn't born flawed. They made me that way. They thought they could wipe me out. But I'm the last one." The final chapter, of what? The RER family? Nick's spiral? Or something even worse? A cover-up that went beyond personal? In that diary, names and dates were meticulously recorded. One name in particular was circled in red ink, December 14th. And what appeared on the mantelpiece after the crime? After the scene was cleaned up, the coroners left, and silence fell. Romy realized something was missing. A photograph. One of the oldest family photos. Carl Reiner, Rob, Michelle, and baby Nick in Rob's arms. The photograph had always sat on the mantelpiece, but after the murder, it vanished without a trace. Nick destroyed it, a symbol or a final message. Erasing the image. Erasing the illusion. Nick not only killed his parents, but also destroyed the story they had painstakingly built. The story of a perfect family. The next thing Jake discovered shattered his last glimmer of hope. Beneath the bookshelf was a safe. And inside wasn't what he expected. What would you do if you opened a diary that seemed to foreshadow a murder? Not figuratively, but in a direct, chilling way. Enigmatic, detailed, and haunting poems. That's exactly what Jake found. No fiction, no other person's story. This was the story of his mother, Michelle Reiner, who, just weeks before her death, had begun recording her private thoughts that no one else knew about. As Jake opened it, hidden in the false bottom of a dresser drawer, his hands trembled, his mouth went dry, his eyes stung. Page after page, she was pleading for help, and no one answered. That discovery came 3 days after the funeral. Jake returned to Brentwood Manor, not for comfort, but out of duty. Romy refused to go with him. Nick was in custody. The media had camped out the gate. Jake stepped through the yellow police tape, past the shattered picture frames, to what had once been a place of peace, and then upstairs to Michelle's room. The room smelled of lavender. The air was chilly, but the wardrobe caught his attention. One of the bottom drawers contained a small jar. It was empty. A scarf, some old photographs, a packet of receipts. But something was wrong. When he pulled the drawer completely open, he found a thin black notebook, untitled, unlabeled, with only the initials MSR on the front cover. He hesitated, then opened it. The first line, "If anything happens to me, start here." A voice from the grave. Jake says reading the diary is like hearing his mother whisper from the other world. The entries aren't in daily order, scattered, crude, unfiltered. Some are just one sentence, some stretch across the page, but all paint a portrait of a woman living in a thick, insatiable fear that she doesn't dare speak out. So she writes it down. The entries are selective, the excerpts verified. November 2nd, 2024. He's pacing back and forth again, that empty look in his eyes. I asked him what he was thinking, and he said, "You'll see." What am I supposed to do about that? November 14th. I asked Rob to consider having Nick stay somewhere for a short time. He said it would ruin his progress. Progress. He hasn't left the house in days. On November 29th, Romy wrote that she saw Nick staring at the fireplace for 30 minutes. Just staring, then laughing. She felt nauseated. On December 4th, Jake begged the family to do something, but Rob didn't mention Nick's name at all. He only said he was going through a difficult phase. What phase, Rob? On December 10th, Michelle dreamt Nick was standing by her bed, only to realize it wasn't a dream. A series of ignored actions, accompanied by an escalation that no one intervened in. The most haunting aspect of the diary isn't just Michelle's fear, but the consistency in Rob's reaction: denial, dismissal, downplaying. According to the account, he told her she was overreacting, that her imagination was exaggerating, that Nick just needed space. Jake believed Rob knew the truth but refused to confront it, and in doing so, he created the conditions for the situation to become deadly. Michelle's diary is heartbreaking because of its emotional complexity. She doesn't hate Nick. She's not bitter. In many passages, she mourns the son she once knew, a small, kind boy. Before, he would pick up stones for her every time they went hiking. Now, he looks at her like a stranger, or worse, as if she were a liar. She blames herself, wondering if being a mother in Hollywood forces her to pretend everything is okay when it isn't. But she still pleads for help, time and time again. "I don't want to die in fear of my son." And in the end, her story ends exactly like that. On December 13th, Michelle writes that Nick stood outside her bedroom door for 14 minutes. She counts the seconds, in silence. No knocking, no movement, just that shadow. She tells Rob. He just stirs and goes back to sleep. She stays awake until sunrise. Jake said reading this passage left him breathless, because less than 24 hours later, that escalation was no longer random. It was a buildup of fear ignored by the only person who could stop it. The last page of the diary contained only one sentence, undated, in shaky handwriting. "I love them all, including him, but I don't feel safe." That's all. No goodbye, no dramatic ending, just the silent final words of a mother. Jake said that sentence would haunt him forever, because now he knew his mother had died in silence and fear. Why didn't she call anyone? Why didn't she leave? Jake believed it was all guilt. She thought leaving would make Nick worse. She thought calling for help would anger Rob. So she endured. She endured it all until it destroyed her. She loved her family so much, trying to protect everyone, including Nick, whom she feared. The diary completely changed the way people perceived the events. It wasn't just a place where Michelle recorded her private feelings and simmering fears. It was living evidence, a chain of memories preserved in every word. When Jake found it, he didn't hesitate to hand it over to the investigators. Each page constructed a terrifying timeline of psychological instability, a dangerous accumulation of behaviors previously known only to the family. This wasn't a rumor, not speculation. This was testimony from the grave, from the very mother who had passed away in silence. As the police read these entries, they had to re-examine all the details in the timeline, recount the testimonies of neighborhood witnesses, and begin to wonder whether these behaviors were momentary outbursts or the result of a long process of psychological erosion. The family's silence, their avoidance, or Rob's protection of his son. Why didn't he act? Did he believe Michelle was exaggerating? Did he think Nick wouldn't cross the line? Or was Rob simply refusing to acknowledge that his own flesh and blood could cause such a terrible thing? Jake believed the answer was a combination of all three. Rob had once said, "The public only sees what you show them." And he seemed to have applied that to his own family life, thinking that if things looked good, they would be good. But that wasn't the reality. Images aren't armor. Hope isn't a plan. Now Rob was gone, and the story he didn't want told was being revealed by his surviving son. But the diary wasn't the whole story. After the last page, Jake discovered a piece of paper taped to the inside cover, with just one word, safe, written in his mother's familiar handwriting. When Jake found the safe, hidden under the false panel of the bookshelf, he realized this story wasn't simply about fear or uncertainty. It also held deep secrets that Michelle wanted to protect until the very end. Inside the safe, instead of money, jewelry, or important documents, were a USB drive, a sealed envelope, 3 handwritten letters, and a DVD labeled in Case M. The contents of the safe have never been fully revealed, but from what Jake discovered, investigators had to pay special attention. These were no longer ordinary clues, but direct evidence from Michelle, from the very person who had experienced the horror in her own home. The video on the USB drive was Michelle's recording from a few weeks before her death. In it, she confessed, warned, and left details that, if known, could completely change how people perceived Nick, Rob, and why the family never sought help. Jake knew that watching this video wasn't simply following his mother's instructions. It would drag him to the very heart of the truth, forcing him to confront what his family had been hiding for so long. Jake didn't want this fight. He didn't want to be the whistleblower. He didn't want to be the son standing at a funeral with a broken heart. But silence had its limits. Jake's limit was reached when he pressed the play button. When the screen lit up, the video, his mother's last message from the other world, completely shattered him. Jake had waited 3 days before daring to open the USB drive. His hands trembled, his stomach churned, his mind reeled with what-if questions. He knew that anything in that file could be the final piece to unravel the story, or something that would destroy everything that remained. As night fell, he locked himself in his apartment, drew the curtains, turned off his phone, and plugged the USB into his computer. Only one video appeared on the screen, no title, just a timestamp. And from that moment, all the truths Jake had ever known began to surface, layer by layer, undeniable, impossible to conceal. On November 29, 2024, Jake pressed play. The image on the screen was blurry, the light dim. Michelle sat in her dressing room, the very room where her diary would later be discovered. She wore a simple sweater, no makeup, no glamour, no acting, just the truth. Her voice was soft, even, but heavy, full of weariness. Sadness was evident in her eyes. She began, "If you are watching this, then something happened, something I tried to prevent. And now, I need you to understand why I didn't say it." The confession rang out, brief but powerful. The video lasted 12 minutes, each second filled with emotion, fear, and truth. In the following minutes, Michelle poured out her fears, regrets, and, most importantly, the guilt she carried. She recounted how Nick's behavior had escalated in recent months, her pleas to Rob to take action, and her anxieties for her own safety, her family's, and even her investment returns. But then, Michelle said something that Jake and anyone else listening couldn't have predicted. "Rob made me promise not to go public, not to call the police, not to ask anyone outside of family for help. He said we would lose everything. Nick would be ruined. We would be disgraced forever. So I did nothing. I kept quiet, and now." She broke down in tears. Her sobs lasted only a few seconds before she regained her composure. "If he hurts me, please don't defend him. Not this time. Tell the truth, no matter how painful it is. Especially if it's painful." The screen suddenly went black. Jake sat silently, frozen, staring at the screen, feeling crushed by the weight of the truth. Finally, his anger erupted. He had been patient, restrained for so long. He had spoken to his father, warned his mother, remained calm during interviews. But now, things were different. Jake knew he had evidence in hand, not just of negligence, not just of fear, but of complicity. Rob had known, had admitted the risk, yet had chosen to remain silent. And Michelle's voice in the video was no longer a memory, it was a call to action. Unable to remain silent any longer, Jake decided to go public. The next day, he contacted a longtime friend, a journalist for a major television station. He handed over the entire diary, the video, Nick's voicemails, the entries, the dates, the chronological order. Then, he prepared for an interview that could shake the nation. The interview was broadcast live on national television. Jake Reiner sat across from host Meredith Hall, doing something no member of the Reiner family had ever done before, exposing the truth. He began calmly, composedly, but every word carried weight. "This isn't just a tragedy," he said. "This is a pattern, a preventable pattern." He leaned forward. "My mother warned my father. I warned my father. We all did. But he told us to be quiet, because silence is safer than scandal." Immediately, horror spread across social media. Within minutes, the hashtag #ReinerCoverUp trended on X, formerly Twitter. Jake didn't stop. He detailed Nick's history of mental breakdown, the therapist Rob fired, the missing security footage, and finally, Michelle's video, a confession from the other world. Every detail, every word, every piece of evidence that Jake publicly revealed created a complete picture of the truth that the Reiner family had tried to keep hidden, leaving the public, the media, and even those who had once admired them stunned. My mother's last words were a plea to tell the truth, and I would respect that, even if it meant destroying what little our family reputation remained. Meredith Hall asked, "Do you think your father aided the murderer?" Jake didn't hesitate. Yes, and that answer was the reason he paid with his life. The consequences were inevitable. The interview sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Production companies immediately removed Rob Reiner memorial programs. Commemorative film screenings were canceled. Longtime family friends, who had remained silent for years, began speaking out. An anonymous director admitted, "We all knew Nick had problems, but Rob always insisted that family matters should be kept private." Jake's decision to go public fractured that close circle. Some called Jake brave, others called him a traitor. But he didn't care. The truth wasn't a betrayal. Romy didn't appear in public, but Jake said she called him that night. They hadn't spoken for weeks, and when she called, her voice was shaky, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for not letting them rewrite her story," she said before hanging up. That was the moment Jake knew he'd done the right thing, even if it meant losing everything else. Jake also revealed another shocking piece of information in the interview, a letter found in Rob's office, addressed to his children a few weeks before his death. Jake read a passage on live television. "We all protect the people we love. Sometimes too much, sometimes to the point of harm. I just hope one day you'll understand that I tried to save him, and maybe save us too." Jake folded the paper, looking directly into the camera. "Dad, you protected the wrong person." The tipping point is never a fleeting moment. It was a slow, continuous stream of ignored warnings, silent screams, second chances given to those who had never taken responsibility. Jake was done waiting, done whispering, done protecting the ghosts. Because the worst thing wasn't losing his parents, but realizing they could have been saved, and the person who could have saved them chose not to. But the story wasn't over. A week later, Jake received a call from his mother's lawyer. What he was told shattered everything he ever knew about Nick, Rob, and Michelle once again. A second video, hidden away in a safe, bore only Jake's name. What really happened inside the RER building on the night of December 14th? Not the media version, not the distorted version. This is the truth. The unheard screams, the unlocked doors, the walk to the guest house, the disabled alarm system, and the moment when the son they once protected became their own executioner. We have it all. Security footage, timestamps, autopsy reports, text messages, voicemails, and a chilling confession whispered by someone who should have fled but didn't. This is the story of every minute, every detail, of the horror and silence an entire family chose to protect their image more than their lives. On the night Rob and Michelle Reiner were murdered, the sun was setting over Brentwood. It was a cold Sunday, the sky clear, seemingly so still that even the slightest sound stood out. The Reiner family had had a peaceful day. Michelle had picked up her groceries early in the morning at 9:38, while Rob was reading the newspaper in his study. According to the housekeeper, who had left at noon, Nick hadn't been seen all day. No calls had been made, no visitors had arrived, and the security camera footage from the front gate only showed no one entering or leaving after 10 a.m. The atmosphere remained quiet, almost heavy. Then, at about 4:42 p.m., the setting sun cast its golden glow over the estate, and Nick emerged from the guest house. 5 minutes later, he was heading toward the main house. The security footage was later recovered from a cloud backup that Rob apparently didn't know existed. It shows Nick walking from the East Garden path toward the main house. He's barefoot, wearing black sweatpants and a gray hoodie. He's empty-handed, but in the kangaroo pocket of his hoodie, he's hiding a long, sharpened kitchen knife. When he reaches the sliding door, Nick stops, staring inside for 43 seconds before slowly opening it. No alarm sounds, as Rob had disabled the alarm system the previous week. He told Michelle that the purpose was to make Nick feel unsupervised. Silence descends on the property, but that very silence opens the door to the impending tragedy. If you found this video helpful and want to follow more stories like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel. Every view, every comment helps spread the story to more people.